Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Welcome back to my Future Look series. And today we're going to be going back into the world of Dragon Quest. Psaro the Manslayer of Dragon Quest IV fame will be joining War of the Visions, alongside Zoma, who we looked at in my last video. Now, in terms of how you actually pronounce this guy's name, I have seen some people arguing for Psaro. I'm just going to go with Psaro. That is just how my brain is trained to enunciate that leading P and S. Now, the character art on this guy just looks incredible. He's going to be a new 90 cost fire unit, and he's coming hot on the heels of his collaboration mate Zoma. Now, this unit might look great, and he certainly comes from a classic Dragon Quest game in Dragon Quest IV, but does he actually have the kit to back it up? And that's what we're going to look at today, so let's get right into it. Alright, so as mentioned, Psaro is a 90 cost fire unit. He has a base movement of 3 and a jump of 2, and he can wear hats and cloth. Now, starting with his TMR, this one is going to give you a self-haste ability while also reducing your hate by 6. The base stats on this one are okay, maybe for building out an evade TMR, and I do really like the effect on it. Haste is definitely always really nice. I just wish that it had 2 casts on it like most modern TMRs out there that we've seen. I really have no idea why they seem to flip-flop sometimes and give some TMRs just a single cast. I think it really hurts the usability of them, in Guild Wars, for example. And this being a limited units TMR as well, I just think it's a missed opportunity on this one. Alright, so moving on to his stats, and there's definitely a lot to like here, as you can see in the graphs. And you can see that Psaro is actually above average in nearly every category here. Now, sticking out the most is definitely going to be that attack, luck, and agility. And that base agility does have him tied for 7th in the game as of today. Just a little bit shy of the top mark, which is Nivlu's 65. His innate HP value here at just over 3,700 isn't too shabby either, especially for an evasive attack type unit. And speaking of evade, you can see that his innate value here comes in at 73. Now keep in mind that this would be including 2 passives that we'll look at here in a moment. But for perspective, I'd say that puts him as sort of a mid to mid-high tier in terms of starting evade. And I will bring up my evade index here for your reference. So you can see here he is not quite matching that top end like some of the 100 cost evade units, but his base stats actually do put him in a very good position to scale very well, especially when it comes to luck and agility. And I think in the end actually do put him in a very competitive spot. Now looking quickly at Psaro's mastery here, it's going to provide him a 15% slash resist penetration, as well as 30% acquired AP. In terms of the defensive numbers, notably he's completely lacking when it comes to defense and spirit. Not really all that uncommon when we're looking at different evade units, but still I think it would have been nice to have seen at least a little something there. He does have some nice resistances here to help make up for it, particularly the slash and strike coming in at 10%, and then missile at 15%. He is actually positive against magic damage as well, but it is at just 5%. His only damage weakness here, similar to Zoma, is the pierce damage resistance, and that's coming in at a negative 10 value. Overall here, a decent resistance package, especially for an evade unit. In terms of the ailment resists here, he is getting 50% to sleep and immobilize. And then he has a lesser resistance against paralyze. I'd say sleep is definitely a good one for an evade unit. When you're under that status, you actually can't dodge any attacks. He'll definitely still be wary of other things, especially charm, disable, and stop though. Moving on to Psaro's support abilities and counters. And I'm actually seeing a few ways that you could take him here, in terms of your builds. And the first one that I'm going to show here would be an all-out evade build. And for this build path, I would take options 2 and 3 to get his evade as high as I possibly could. And that is going to give me a combination of 12 flat evade, 12% agility, and then similar to Valentine's Eldyra, he's getting a 25 flat evade towards 2 particular damage types. And in his case, that's going to be missile and magic-based damage. Now the trade-off for this particular build is that you would not actually be taking any defense penetration here in the passives, so you will need to find other areas to help build that up. And thankfully he actually does have some options there that we will take a look at later in the video. Now the second build path here would be more of a damage oriented build, and for that I'm going to take options 4 for the defense penetration and crit rate, and then I would add either options 1 or 2 to that. Now I have sort of conflicting information here on this first passive. There is actually a condition that is not listed on War of the Visions calc, and that is that this one is taking impact when Psaro is at 40% or less HP. The part that is a little bit unclear there is that which of these 2 two effects actually take effect at less than 40% health. I think that I would lean towards that 20% flat damage increase being tied into that condition. That seems to make the most sense. But again, I'm definitely not crystal clear on that. The translation that I have from Ultima makes it look like the counter chance is actually tied into that condition. So if anybody is actually familiar with how that actually works from the Japanese side and has full clarity on that, if you could put a comment down below, I'd really appreciate that. And I will leave a pin there for everybody else to see. Now the third build option would be to leverage his Trick Lancer build, and for that I'm actually going to take both Trick Lancer passives, which are options 4 and 5 here. And this will actually enhance his Binding Javelin ability, as we've seen in the past with other Trick Lancers such as Winter Luartha. That fifth support option there does actually give him immunity to both Confuse and Stun, which will be very useful if you're using him up against a team of Agrius and Snow. Of course, they both bring a very high chance for those status effects on their limit bursts. Now in terms of Psaro's counter abilities, if you were going to be going all in for that evade build that we talked about, I think that option 1 is the clear choice. Remember that we were giving up defense penetration. This is one of the ways that he can help build that up. So what this one does is that every time he evades an attack, he's actually going to get both 20% slash res penetration and 20 defense penetration. The nice thing about this is it can stack up to 3 times. So he can actually accrue up to 60 penetrations of both of these types, if he were to dodge 3 times consecutively. So that is certainly a very nice option to have in his kit, and I think it will incentivize you, to build his dodge, as high as you possibly can to really maximize the effects of that. Now counter number 3 is the only other one I think that I would consider, and I would use that at any time that I'm not building Psaro as an evade unit. Alright, so let's move on to Psaro's main kit abilities, and let's start with the buffs here. His self-only buff will provide him 2 casts of Courage, and on use it does restore a flat 20 AP, and it provides him a 20% physical damage buff while the Courage effect is active. So having access to Courage or Re-Raise is definitely one of the first things that I look for in a top tier evade unit, or really any unit I'd say, to be honest, these days. So Psaro is definitely off to a good start here. Now his party buff is going to be providing 25% agility and 25% evasion to your allies. So bar none, this is probably one of the best evade-centric buffs that I've seen in the game to date. Remember that agility not only speeds you up in your turns, but it does increase your evade capability as well. And this one is especially nice for Psaro because he does have that very high base agility value that we talked about earlier. And this 25% buff will actually net him roughly 16 agility on top of that. Now, unfortunately, this does overlap just a bit with Valentine's Ildira. Her party buff does bring that 25% evasion as well. But I think that it can actually open up some other options for you there. You could actually opt to put Vildira onto TMR buff duty, or you could just have her kind of flank and do her own thing. Alright, let's look at his main kit attacks here next. And his low AP skill is a range 1, height 1 with a 121% mod. And this one will decrease the accuracy of the target by a flat 25. And this is a 2-hit chaining ability. So it's always nice when an evade unit has ways to decrease the accuracy of an opponent, either by this flat accuracy decrease or a blind effect. I do think in Psaro's case that this is going to be more for like a manual play type situation where you're actually controlling the unit. When you actually have freedom over when and how you're going to use this buff, maybe you actually lead off with this one, once you get into range. In terms of auto, again, these low AP sort of finisher style attacks really only come out in a couple of scenarios, so generally not something that you can rely on to really increase your evade in the beginning of the battle or during the mid-fight. Maybe it would have been nicer for this skill to have a longer range, maybe something like 5 range, so that he might be using this on his approach towards the enemy, when maybe he's not quite in range yet to use his more powerful skills. His second attack here is definitely pretty interesting. This one is a non-elemental typeless attack, so it is purely just a physical skill that is checked against the target's defense. And this one has actually a pretty nice range on it of up to 4 with a range height of 1 and a medium 165 mod. This one will reduce the target's defense by 30, and it has 2 post-damage effects as well. So there is actually quite a bit of utility here packed into just a single skill. After the damage, it's also going to decrease the target's attack by 43% and their healing power by 60. I do actually like this skill quite a bit. These types of non-elemental attacks I think can be very nice, as we talked about with Zoma, when an enemy is building up their elemental resist to try to counter you. This one having that defense break built into it prior to the damage will actually have it hitting pretty heartless, regardless of the target. His next skill here is a range 3, again with a range height of 1. This one coming with a large 200% mod. This one has sort of a small T-shaped AoE, Kind of an interesting one. I don't think we've seen this shape before. This one is just bringing a single effect on it, and this will increase your chance to hit by 30%. So it actually could come in very handy if you're in an evade mirror match. Psaro's base accuracy actually isn't all that bad. Really the only thing holding him back from being, amongst the top tier was any access to an accuracy-based passive, within his support abilities. So as is the case, with most evade units out there, due to their raw innate luck, if you can find those accuracy bonuses elsewhere, you can actually build them out to be very accurate units. Now Psaro's fourth skill here is a range 3 with a +1 on the cross AoE. There's a range height of 1, again with a +1 on the AoE. It's again bringing a large 200% mod, and we have 2 effects here that come prior to the damage. We have a physical barrier break and a dispel of a mortal spirit. Very nice skill here for Psaro. It is not super common that we are seeing these types of effects on an area of effect attack. And the fact that we have both the barrier break and the courage dispel on one attack, along with that large 200% modifier, I think actually makes this skill very powerful. Once again, this could be a very useful skill in those evade mirror matches. Many of those top tier evade units are bringing a mortal spirit. The other nice thing on this is that even if you were to miss, because those dispels are coming prior to the damage, those will still retain their effect even if you miss your target. His limit burst is last up here. This one is bringing a range of 5 with a range height of 1, bringing an extra large 240% modifier. Now prior to the damage, it does have a general dispel effect. Not too bad, I do actually wish there was a little bit more to this, seeing as it is single target. Maybe if it was a chain attack, that could have been pretty cool. But dispels are always very handy to have, especially in this case where it's actually one of his longest range skills at range 5. So in many cases, he will probably be looking to lead off the fight with this, especially since this is also his highest damaging skill at 240% modifier. Alright, let's quickly review Psaro's sub-jobs here next. And starting with the main job sub, his first attack here is pretty decent. It will have a 25% slash imperil and coming in across AoE. Maybe another good skill, if you're playing manually. Otherwise, I don't think this skill would be coming out too often just because that imperil is coming after the damage and he has higher damaging AoE skills that we've looked at earlier, in the review. He does get a second attack here as well, and as far as I can tell, this seems to be sort of a joke skill or a reference to the game in some way. It has a massive negative 150% hit rate tied into it, so overall this is going to make it very, very hard to hit anybody with this. So overall, it just seems this sub job here is kind of more for flavor uses or, maybe the occasional niche use. So that's kind of unfortunate, but I think it turns out okay because he does actually have a couple of other really good sub jobs, and so let's look at those next. The next one is Samurai, and this actually does give him an alternate evasion skill, if you wanted to use it. The reason why you might is that this one actually got buffed up on the Japanese side. It now brings in 15 area resist to yourself, in addition to the 25 evade. So in that regard, it could actually be useful for maybe a bruiser build if you were looking to have ways to enhance his survivability. Aside from that, I've always liked the Hind skill. It's a very AP efficient skill, costing just 12 AP. That skill has also been buffed, and now when you have a killing blow with that particular attack, it will actually bring back 8 AP into your bank. So it essentially is actually making that skill cost only 4 AP, which is actually very nice. I do think that my preferred sub-job for him will be the Trick Lancer though, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's giving him access to an alternate damage type in Pierce. I think that could be especially useful if you haven't had an opportunity to build up much slash res penetration on him. Now secondly, as we talked a little bit about earlier, it does give him access to the Binding Javelin skill, and that can get up to 6 range if you take the passive ability to amp that up. It's not often that we have units, outside of missile units or arithmeticians that can get 6 range, so I think that alone makes it pretty powerful. And the effect as well is also very strong in that it can immobilize your target at a very high chance. The Pierce damage type is a common weakness for many units out there in the game as well, so I think it is a really good way to sort of round out his damaging capabilities, and there is actually a lot of utility that comes baked into this job with some other breaks as well. Alright, let's look into future considerations next. And the week following Psaro's release, the answer to many people's prayers out there, finally a new Fire Vision card. And I think I'd definitely say it's probably one of the best Vision cards that I've seen this year. Maybe not quite as good as Sadali's Vision card, but definitely I would say, among the top 5. Now the base stats on this one, they bring a moderate level of HP, a pretty high amount of attack, and the 20 flat luck on there is probably one of the best parts of the base stats here. That's always especially nice when you're trying to maximize evade, of course. I do actually really like the bestowed ability on this one. It's giving 20 defense pen and then 5 evasion. I do especially like the defense penetration here because that could actually be especially useful for some of the build options that we've talked about for Psaro. And it can also be very good for giving to other fire units who maybe don't bring a lot of defense pen in their kits innately. I think about a unit like Seymour or Winter Macherie, for example. The prize of this vision card, though, is the party abilities that's coming along with it. It's giving Fire not only its first full value luck card, but also its first full value agility card as well. So we have 2 of the 3 evade stats here covered on one particular card, and that's going to make it especially good for building out a fire evade party, but it's going to be equally good for building out a fire accuracy party as well. And I'd say that these are a couple of the key ingredients that fire as an element has been missing, among their vision cards, and has been missing for quite some time now. So if you are a fire player, I would say that this one is a can't miss, definitely pick this one up. I do hope that there is still more to come, I think there is a few other areas that fire could still use some love, but I think we'll just have to continue to be patient and wait for those. So during this Dragon Quest collaboration event, there's actually not 1, but 2 items that will come with Psaro, and the first one is his sword. I have featured the crit version here. Psaro actually does have pretty nice crit potential, within his base build, if you're including his passive support abilities. And in the case of this crit version of the sword here, you would be giving up about 30 attack to net back 15 crit value. And that's going to give it 20 total in the base stats, as you can see here. That's going to come along with 122 base attack and 6 accuracy, so decent all-around numbers there for the sword. And one of the main reasons that I am trying to build up his crit just a bit here is that Trick Lancer ability, Binding Javelin, the immobilize on it is conditional on him critting, so it is actually a pretty important stat for him. Now for the passive abilities, anyone equipping the sword will pick up that 15 slash attack, but when Psaro is wielding it, he's actually going to pick up another 3 passive abilities, which is very powerful. He's going to get 20% slash res penetration, 15% luck, and a reduction of 15% to his AP cost. Undoubtedly, this will be the best option to use for an evade build. That 15% luck passive is better than we can get on a Trust Stone. The AP consumption reduction that he's picking up here is very nice quality of life on there as well, and I think it does actually go pretty nicely with the acquired AP that he has in his mastery. So this is definitely a nice all-around option that you can use for pretty much any build, I'd say, with Psaro. Now this is the second piece of gear that's going to come along with the event, and this one is actually going to come as a raid item from the Dragon Quest collaboration. Now I am highlighting the dodge version here for Psaro, but I think actually the shield version is pretty decent as well. It has a pretty nice amount of defense on it. Now one notable thing about this item is it is actually coming with the strike resist passive for anyone who wears it. Very rare for an item to have that particular resist on it within the game, and it's definitely notable for that reason alone. Aside from that though, this actually could be a pretty good evade piece for Psaro. It's getting up to a total of 35 evade between the base stats and the passive. Not quite as much total evade as we've seen on an item like the Winter's Clothes, for example, but it is actually pretty close. Remember that this is an accessory as well, so it is something that you could actually combo along with that armor if you wanted to. Now in the case of the Dragon Quest units that are coming in the collaboration, this item will be picking up 3 additional passives. That's going to be 10 Pierce Resist, the 15 Evade that I mentioned, and then it's picking up 5 Human Resist, which is a new mechanic or a new type of passive that we haven't seen before. And that's basically going to work as a 5% damage reduction to pretty much any of the units out there in a PvP scenario. So very cool item, I would say here. I'd say especially when you can double up on the effectiveness of those passives. If you happen to be going up against maybe a Strike or Pierce unit, and you can combo that resist along with the Human Resist there. All right, moving into the 2022 timeline here once again, and I'll just lightly touch on this one here, because it is identical to my last video with Zoma. But as I mentioned there, I think due to the global Christmas event that kind of lines up to when we expect to see these units, that could be pushing these units maybe into early 2023. And if we think about, what's going on for the fire elements, for the back half of this year, there's really not a lot going on that we know about so far. Of course, there is Delita and the Blades of Grass card that will be coming during the 2.5-year anniversary. And then alongside Glaciella, there will be the Dark Tetravision card that is effective on fire units as well, and is actually a very powerful option for them. In terms of the elemental wheel adjacencies for the fire, in terms of water and ice, we do have Chunak, for the water elements that will be coming most likely around late October. And of course, when it comes to ice, there is a lot going on here, including a 100 cost unit in Alaya. So we're definitely going to be in need of some strong firepower to sort of keep this ice meta in check. It kind of remains to be seen, if we'll get that. If it just ends up being Delita trying to fend them off himself, I think that we're going to be seeing a very, very cold winter. Will the fire element end up being surprised with the leaked Halloween Lucia? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So I did put a mock build together here for Psaro, and this one is going to be a balls to the wall evade build. And to really maximize our evade, we're really going to be looking for 3 things, and that is going to be luck value, high agility, and then any flat evade that we can get our hands on. Now in terms of autoplay, my personal preference is to always run a tank out in front of my evade units. And the reason why I like to do that is that really is going to limit your side and back exposure to the enemy. If they are targeting your tank with an area of effect attack and you happen to be within that range, generally your side and back are going to be protected there. That is pretty important for an evade unit, because if an enemy is trying to hit you from the side or back, they do get an increase to their accuracy in those scenarios. Now in this particular build, I would be using both evade-centric passives that we looked at earlier in the video. Of course, you could look to maybe potentially drop the Blade Soul passive and then lose 12 flat evade if you wanted to pick up the Trick Lancer passive and get that 40 defense penetration and increase maybe some of your offensive potency. Whether that is really worth it to you, I think all depends on how reliably you're getting his counter ability to proc off to get the additional penetrations that one would offer. That said, let's actually dive into the build here, and I have tried to pick up as much evade as I possibly could without really sacrificing too much offensive potency here. Now you can see I do have King Mont as my tank, and I am bringing Valentine's Ildira as the other evade unit. The nice thing about this build is it does actually have the flexibility to be used as an ice killer build as well. My King Mont will actually have a 95% base ice resistance in this build, with the assist from the Shiva Vision card that he has in his main slot, and the bestowed ability on that card is actually 10 ice resistance, which does actually work very well for our purposes here. Now within the equipment, I am using the new sword for that 15% luck. For his armor, I did opt for the black garb, and that's to pick up some additional defense penetration since I am not using that Trick Lancer passive. And for the TMR, I am using Katone's TMR here, and that's just for the base stats of the item. It has 5 agility and 12 evade on it, which is very, very strong. I do think that the effect there could be pretty useful as well, probably more so for manual play, but mobility actually can be pretty good to have even in autoplay in some maps. Moving into the Trust Stone loadouts here, let's start with the left side. And because I am looking to potentially counter some ice teams out there, I am bringing in the missile, strike, and ice resistance here. Adding to that, I do have HP up, all elemental debuff resistance to help protect against some imperils out there. And then notably, I do bring in agility debuff resistance here. And I do think this one is very important for evade units. You want to avoid as much as you possibly can getting debuffed in your agility. With the high base agility that these type of units tend to have, getting debuffed by 20 or 25% agility can have a pretty big impact on your evade total. Now I am tying all of these passives here into a luck set, and that's going to enhance my evade even further. Now you could opt for a straight dodge set here on the left. I don't actually think it's worth it, in this particular configuration, and that's because of how the stat stacking works when we have a couple of different evade items. I was actually only picking up maybe 3 or so more evade there by swapping over to that set. The trade-off is I'm losing a lot of accuracy, because I'm not enhancing my luck there. So I do think luck is the overall better option, especially if you may be anticipating hitting an evade mirror match, somewhere along the way. Now, on the right side for my Trust Stones, I do have a Utility Stone here in slot 1 with the acquired AP and Dex. Now, Dex is actually a sneaky good stat for Psaro. It actually factors into the damage scaling, even of his main kit attacks at a pretty high value. So any added Dex that you can get for him will be helpful and actually will improve his damage. Now, adding to that, I do have an attack up mode, and I have some modifiers here with fire and crit. Now, if you were actually happy with the crit rate that you were getting, that particular passive is one that you could look at trading out. You could maybe bring in something like Pierce Attack instead, and that would be to enhance the damage of his Trick Lancer abilities. Now, I do have all of these tied in here on the right side to an agility set, and again, that is to maximize my evasion capability. Now, there are definitely some other builds that you could look at with Psaro. I was playing around with more of a bruising style comp and actually specializing highly in that pierce damage, bringing in something like the Phoenix Vision card, which for pierce damage units is actually pretty decent for the fire elements. And I do actually think that build is pretty viable. He does have a Mortal Spirit. He is not a unit that's going to die in one hit generally. So I do think that, this is not just a straight evade unit. He does have a little bit of versatility there, and I'm not going to show off those builds here today, but maybe as it gets a little bit closer to his release, I will do a follow-up video and maybe show off some of the other builds that I've been working on here for him. In terms of the evade build today, as always, I will put a link to that in the description below, so definitely check that out and let me know what you think. So what is my verdict on Psaro? For starters, this is a top tier evade unit, but what is actually my criteria when I say that? Well, the first piece is that his evade total is actually competitive, with other top-end evaders out there. That is a definite yes, as we saw on the mock build, he is actually getting well over a 300% total evade value. And that's going to put him in the same general ballpark as other top evaders from the light and earth elements. Now, on top of that, he is also bringing 2 casts of Immortal Spirit to kind of give him a get-out-of-jail-free card if he is to take fatal damage, and that's going to give him that layered survivability that I look for in an evade unit. Now, on top of that, he is bringing very nice damage potential. He does have 2 different damage types in both Slash and Pierce. He does also have a typeless non-elemental attack, which does have very high damage as well. He's definitely not a slouch, when it comes to the utility departments. He can bring in some agility, defense, and barrier breaks. And then on top of that, he does have that general dispel and the Immortal Spirit dispel there as well. In terms of concerns that I have for this unit, maybe not so much centered on this unit specifically, but more the evade playstyle in general. I think that the days of running that particular style kind of day in and day out are kind of behind us, at least for now. And I think the best way to use it, now in the current state of the game, where we are seeing higher overall accuracy, amongst the various units, is you kind of break evade out as maybe as a surprise play or maybe as a way to capitalize against teams who aren't bringing very high accuracy. Now, the evade build, I think, is probably the most competitive build that this unit does offer. So it does maybe put his strength into maybe a little bit more of a niche category than I would like to see. But I think that it is very strong, for when it's applicable and for what it does. I will say though, that as the game progresses and we get more and more options available at our fingertips, I think it's only natural that kind of each unit kind of falls into place and has their own niche that they can fill. It is nice though that I think that this unit can do other things, besides evade, because he has that Immortal Spirit and that sort of layered survivability. Just having his high damage output and multiple types of attack, I think does make him useful in other areas as well. Now, aside from that, I am still looking for a little bit more power from the fire elements. I think we're still maybe a top level vision card or 2 away before I can begin to entertain fire as one of the top elements in the game. Now, my last point here is definitely more of a nitpick, and that's that I wish that he had some innate way to improve his mobility. I'd really like to have that option on an evade unit, especially for manual play, but it can definitely be very nice in auto play for a disruptive playstyle as well, and sort of getting in the face of an enemy before they're able to buff up and sort of take them out of their pre-configured rhythms. So I'd say really not a ton of concerns that I have for this unit. I think most of these are very nitpicky, that I've pointed out here. I think that he's a pretty solid overall unit and definitely a good addition to the fire roster. As we've seen within the stats and abilities, I think that he has strengths in multiple areas that could be leveraged to good effect. So while he's definitely not the tankiest of units out there, he does have that Immortal Spirit that he can fall back on and sort of give him a get out of jail free card. And that certainly will help him out in a big way. Alright guys, so that wraps up the Dragon Quest collaboration. Overall, it's a pretty strong collab, I'd say. 2 very usable and viable 90 cost units that we're getting here, both of which I think are bringing some new looks to their respective elements. Not only that, I think there is some really nice vision cards and equipment that are actually coming along with this event as well. Now, neither of these units I would say are really going to be meta shakers, though I think if I had to choose, I would say Zoma is kind of looking a little bit better to me, at least as of right now. If you do play Fire or Ice though, I think you could do much worse than either of these units. And certainly for the Dragon Quest and nostalgia seekers out there, I think there is something good to be found in both Psaro and Zoma alike. But specifically when it comes to Psaro, this actually could be laying a good groundwork for a future, 100 cost fire unit. So his stocks could certainly rise in the future, if that were to come to pass. So with that said, how are you guys feeling on this one? Do these Dragon Quest units have your interest piqued? By the time these units come to global, I think we'll be looking at the new Warriors of Crystal and the 3rd year anniversary right around the corner. So I think it could end up being a hard sell for us, at that point. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.